I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is open for at least 45 more days. Today, our servicemen and women do not have to worry about missing any paychecks. TSA agents, too. National parks remain open after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy caught almost everyone off guard Saturday with a plan to work with House Democrats to keep the U.S. government open without demanding any of the spending cuts hardline House Republicans had been demanding just one day earlier, as Republicans are trying to collect themselves after stepping on rake after rake this week. And Democrats are taking a victory lap after what was, by any objective measure, an embarrassing week for the House GOP. The end result buys McCarthy a little more time to settle a raging disagreement within his conference over spending and, more to the point, over his leadership. But his gambit could also put his job on the line as a handful of hardliners consider whether to follow through on their threat to oust McCarthy from the speakership for working with Democrats to pass a clean spending bill. And joining me now is the man leading that charge against Speaker McCarthy, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So you have been threatening to topple McCarthy, issue a motion to vacate the speakership if he worked with Democrats to fund the government with a clean CR, a clean government spending bill, which is exactly what he did on Friday and Saturday. The House gavels back in tomorrow at noon. Are you going to make a motion to vacate?
Speaker McCarthy made an agreement with House conservatives in January, and since then he has been in brazen, repeated material breach of that agreement. This agreement that he made with Democrats to really blow past a lot of the spending guardrails we'd set up is a last straw. And then overnight I learned that Kevin McCarthy had a secret deal with Democrats on Ukraine. So as he was baiting Republicans to vote for a continuing resolution without Ukraine money, saying that we were going to jam the Senate on Ukraine, he then turns around and makes a secret deal. Now, I know you and I probably have different views on U.S. involvement in Ukraine, but however you think about that question, it should be subject to open review, analysis, and not some backroom deal.
So I do motion to vacate tomorrow?
I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that can be trustworthy. Look, the one thing everybody has in common is that nobody trusts Kevin McCarthy. He lied to Biden. He lied to House conservatives. He had appropriators marking to a different number altogether. And the reason we were backed up against this shutdown politics is not a bug of the system, it's a feature. Kevin McCarthy's goal was to make multiple contradictory promises, to delay everything, back us up against shutdown politics, and at the end of the day, blow past the spending guardrails he'd agreed to.
So how many Republicans do you think will be with you in your motion to vacate? Because obviously, for people at home who don't know, you need 218 votes to get him out of the speakership. You don't have 218 Republican votes. You're going to need Democrats. Let's start with the Republicans. How many Republicans do you have?
Well, enough so that when you host this show next week, if Kevin McCarthy is still the Speaker of the House, he will be serving at the pleasure of the Democrats. He will be working for the Democrats. The only way Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House at the end of this coming week is if Democrats bail him out. Now, they probably will. I actually think that when you believe in nothing, as Kevin McCarthy does, everything's negotiable.
Okay, but
and I think he'll cut a deal with the Democrats.
Let's be honest here, though, because if you succeed in vacating him, you also will have to make a deal with the Democrats. You also will have to get Democratic votes to kick him out.
Absolutely, I will make no deal with Democrats and concede no terms to them. I actually think Democrats should vote against Speaker McCarthy for free. I don't think I should have to deal them anything.
So you're not going to cut any deals with him?
Absolutely not. And I don't think that any Republicans that share my view on Speaker McCarthy would cut deals with Democrats. But here's the thing. I'm done owning Kevin McCarthy. Right? We made a deal at the end of in January to allow him to assume the speakership, and I'm not owning him anymore because he doesn't tell the truth. And so if Democrats want to own Kevin McCarthy by bailing him out, I can't stop him, but then he'll be their speaker, not mine.
So let's talk about what's just happened this last week, the government shutdown, because obviously, as you know, you've made a lot of enemies this last week. A lot of people, I'm talking about House Republicans. I'm not talking about Democrats or the media. I'm talking about House Republicans. They're pretty angry. Take a listen.
Unfortunately, a handful of people, and in particular a party of one, Matt Gaetz, have chosen to put his own agenda, his own personal agenda, above all else. He's not a conservative Republican, he's a charlatan.
They killed the most conservative position we could take, and then called themselves the real conservatives, which is like, make that make sense.
Now, the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote an editorial about what you're doing called A Government Shutdown for Dummies. And among the criticisms, they said, quote, the real goal of the malcontents seems to be to topple Mr. McCarthy for personal spite. It's also pointlessly stupid with failure foreordained. Their constituents wanted conservative policies, but the Gaetz Republicans are playing personal games. What do you say to these conservatives, these Republicans?
Well, I think what's really stupid is sitting atop a $33 trillion debt, facing $2.2 trillion annual deficits, while the world is de-dollarizing. Just in August, you saw the BRICS system that is moving away from the dollar add 6 new countries, including Gulf monarchies, including even some of the G20 economies in our own hemisphere.
People at home, that's BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, China. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they are moving away from the dollar. You're seeing the African Union move away from the dollar. U.S. News just last month said that de-dollarization was the economic trend of our day. And so some people try to make policy disagreements personal because their own policy failures are so personally embarrassing. But this isn't personal, Jake.
Yeah.
This is about spending. This is about the deal Kevin McCarthy made. If Kevin McCarthy didn't want to keep the deal to return to pre-COVID spending, if he didn't want to keep the deal to have single subject spending bills, not vote for government spending all up or down at once, then he shouldn't have made that deal. So this is about keeping Kevin McCarthy to his word. It's not about any personal animus or dispute.
But let's talk about this, because Speaker McCarthy argues that he had a bill on Friday that would have put forward less spending than what actually has now become the law for the next 45 days. That would have gone to the Senate. The Senate would have voted for their own bill, and then in a conference committee there would have been a negotiation, and what would have become the law of the land for the next 45 days would have been less spending than what actually is now the bill. Take a listen to Speaker McCarthy.
And look, I welcome those 21 back in, and we would get a better and more conservative bill if they would simply vote with us.
Their argument is your point about debt and deficit spending, which is not an inaccurate point, was actually harmed by the stunt, by the temper tantrum of the government shutdown.
Well, that argument presupposes that the Senate was going to take up or conference that bill that McCarthy wanted. You already had Schumer speaking on the floor saying that they weren't even going to take that up.
But there would have been a conference committee and there would have had to have been a negotiation.
First of all, that's never so what you're saying is that something would have occurred that has never occurred to negotiate a continuing resolution. I have never seen a conference committee in my 7 years in Congress, and I don't think one has occurred since the mid-90s where a continuing resolution has ever been conferenced. So you're asking your viewers to believe something that has never once happened. What has happened when the House has passed a continuing resolution is the Senate merely negotiates the feature of that continuing resolution by sending back what they want to send back, which is what they did. So we were always ending up here. Here's why I want to break the fever. Since the mid-90s, this country has been governed by either continuing resolution or omnibus spending.
And you have voted for continuing resolution in the past.
Well, I'm 5 years sober voting for continuing resolutions, and I should note that during those years, President Trump was growing the economy. But January marked a difference.
Deficit.
Yeah, and you know what?
Growing the deficits as well.
I regret
growing the deficits as well.
But we were growing the economy, and look.
You're talking about the national debt. You were growing. What did he add? $7 trillion, $8 trillion to the national debt. Donald
and
Trump?
by the way, I voted against 10 continuing resolutions under Donald Trump. I did not stand with Donald Trump on all of his spending priorities. I voted against way more than I voted for.
My point is, well, I don't know what this shutdown did to help the cause.
What shutdown?
The shutdown that almost happened.
Okay, so there wasn't a shutdown. So the
threat of shutdown that you created.
We have to break the fever. We have to move to single subject spending bills.
You broke a fever?
No, we didn't, unfortunately. That's why we have to now move to vacate, because we have to get a system where the House and Senate will negotiate over each of these agencies of government independently. And I understand that in divided government, that means that you have to take into account the views of Senate Democrats, the views of the White House. But what I want to
do?
Of
you
course,
understand that?
Of course.
Because you're on the floor of the House talking about what Kevin McCarthy needs to do is to allow line item vetoes by people like you.
That's not true.
Line item votes against the salaries of people who are investigating Donald Trump, the salaries of individuals who are offering sweetheart deals to Hunter Biden. That, to me, is not the language of somebody who understands the balance of power in House and the Senate and how all legislation actually functions.
Well, I think I do.
That, to me, is the language of somebody who is looking for clicks and likes and Fox hits, not somebody who actually is trying to reduce the debt.
Well, you might want to check Fox. I haven't been hitting there as much recently. What I can tell you is that the way the legislative process works, as a 12-year lawmaker in the state and federal level, the House passes legislation, the Senate passes legislation, and then you work to iron out those differences. I believe the best way to advance the interests of the American people is for the House to take the most conservative position and then engage that negotiation. Where that negotiation has failed all Americans of all stripes is when it centers around what ornament you're going to hang on a continuing resolution or an omnibus bill. The responsible, sober, adult way to handle this is with individual spending bills open to amendment. And by the way, if people don't want to vote for the amendments that reduce salaries or cut spending or engage in programmatic analysis, they can vote no. And then the voters can hold people accountable. But the reason we sit atop a $33 trillion debt is because a system has been designed in Washington, D.C. where no one is responsible for the spending.
But where are you?
I want to force the votes. And here's what you're missing. McCarthy agreed to this. So you may not like this deal. You may think that it's too many votes and too much governing. But McCarthy agreed to it in January, and his breach of that
I don't have an
agreement
opinion on
is
it
a
one way or
problem.
the other. And I actually agree with your position on the fact that
Welcome aboard.
I've been here long before you were born, my friend. But like we spend way too much money and we don't take in 100%.
Yeah,
I agree.
we spent
but where
$7
are
trillion
you?
and taken $5.
But where are you when it comes to Senate Democrats who actually control the Senate and the president? And you could force the president's hand if you actually worked with Senate Democrats and got some sort of bill in front of him. That's how you force it.
Well, in the time I've been here, we have not been able to cleave Senate Democrats away from President Biden.
How many Senate Democrats
so
do you
that's not
know?
true.
How many do you talk to?
Well, I've talked to several of them. I go over to the Senate as much as many House members. I've talked to Senator Manchin, talked to Senator Sinema. She and I served together in the House. We've had a number of folks go from the House to the Senate.
One last question, because the reason I know.
But by the way, it's really important you get this point. I'm okay with bipartisan negotiation. I just want it to be on single subject spending bills, not on a global deal that funds the whole government or doesn't.
And the appropriations bills are going through the process
at a snail's pace until I held a political gun to McCarthy's head and forced the Congress to stay until midnight to take these votes.
You should
and
talk
move
to the
these bills.
Appropriations Committee. There are 4 members of the Freedom
Well, by the way,
Caucus on it.
the Appropriations Chairman left the meeting we were having to iron these things out to go to a lobbyist fundraiser.
Last question for you, because the reason you talk about this being about the issue and not animus is because there are a lot of people, a lot of House Republicans who think that there is this personal animus between you and Speaker McCarthy. And I just have to ask you, how much do you blame Speaker McCarthy for the fact that you are under investigation by the House Ethics Committee? How much is that part of what's going on here?
Not at all. Jake, I am the most investigated man in the United States Congress. I've been cleared by the DOJ, the FEC by a 5-0 vote, and the people who spread criminal lies about me are sitting in federal prison right now. So I'm fine being investigated by anyone and everyone.
I have seen personal communications between you and other people in which you blame McCarthy for your ethics investigation.
When Kevin McCarthy went out publicly and said, this isn't about me breaking my word, it's because Gaetz has ethics problems, certainly that was him gaslighting the Ethics Committee. But here's the thing, Jake, I'm not alone. People can say this is a party of one. I have tens of millions of Americans who stand with me on this, and I have a requisite number of House Republicans, a sufficient number to ensure that we don't own Kevin McCarthy anymore. By week's end, he will either not be Speaker or he will be Speaker serving at the pleasure of House Democrats.
To be continued. We'll see what happens. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.